IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I'm Sapni, a research analyst with Takshashila's high-tech geopolitics program, working on most things cyberspace and its regulation, with a focus on its impacts on society. Before we begin today's episode, I'd just like to mention that Takshashila Institution is offering a graduate certificate program in technology and policy, which would be perfect for anyone interested in topics like the one we are discussing today. We also offer other policy-related courses focusing on defense and foreign affairs and health and life sciences. Links are in the show notes, so do consider having a look at them. Cyberspace has become an important part of the larger strategic picture. It has emerged both as a facilitator for our everyday lives and a disruption both in the civilian and on the modern battlefield. A rare consensus is seemingly emerging on there being a need to address and negotiate norms for cyberspace internationally. To discuss, I have with me today my colleague Aditya Parikh and our expert guest, Mr. Oleg Shakirov. Oleg Shakirov is a senior expert at the Center for Advanced Governance and a consultant at PIR Center. He is one of Russia's foremost experts on international relations and cyberspace. His other areas of interest include European security issues, conventional arms control, and the evolution of diplomacy in the digital age. Aditya Parikh is a fellow research analyst here at Takshashila's high-tech geopolitics program and focuses on space policy, subsurface warfare, and Russia and the Asia-Pacific, among a lot of other things. Welcome, Oleg. Welcome, Aditya.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Nice to be with you.
Thank you, Sapni.
Right. So today, let's start with certain questions I'd like to address. I'd like to have Oleg address it. So right now, let's look at, if we're looking at the world at large, so whether it be Russia to US to Turkey, China and beyond, regulation of social media platforms is in a fix and constantly in flux. What are your thoughts on the wide-ranging standards across the globe that are being set for the regulation of social media platforms? Oleg, if you could.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a big question. I will not definitely address all of it, but the key part is that we see now in many countries attempts to regulate social media in different aspects. So, for example, there is one similar trend that is going in the European Union and in Russia, which has to do with some problematic content. In Europe, it's usually hate speech or something related. In Russia, that is much focused on extremist-related content, but there are many more categories in Russia that are supposed to be moderated. There is also an ongoing discussion on some commercial aspects on advertising, but to generalize, many countries seem to now want to have their own relations and their own way to control, maybe not to control, but to regulate somehow what major social media companies do. And I think it's kind of a challenge in particular for social media companies, because they're widely present. But now they have to deal with these different approaches, and it hasn't been successful so far because they are changing more rapidly. There is not enough information, especially in smaller countries, about what they do, and I think it's a developing story. But just to reiterate once again, I see that right now it's not only a story from a small number of states. It's now kind of a global phenomenon.
Right. And I think that leaves us space and room to think about how these norms develop internationally as well. So focusing a little bit more on Russia and taking on from the social media question, Russia's data localization mandate now seems to be influencing other states to take similar routes, tarnishing the once utopian idea that free cyberspace is what we stand for. Are there any specific lessons you'd like to point out to our listeners regarding data localization?
So maybe not specific questions about data localization, but so I see this as part of this approach, general approach to regulate tech companies. Many companies are so in Russia we have a sort of this peculiar situation. We have strong Russian companies. Russian search engine dominates Russian market. It's called Yandex, so it's usually a bit ahead of Google. We have Russian social media, some Russian streaming platforms, which I'm sure is the case in other countries too. But then we don't have strong kind of limitation on international companies' presence as well. But some of the requirements are data localization. Now there is a new requirement which mandates that major foreign companies have to have physical presence in Russia, meaning they have to open local offices. For example, Facebook does not have an office in Russia. It has a branch in Poland that deals with Russian issues. And now they will be by this new law, and we are yet to see its implementation, but they will be required to open up an office in Russia. And so data localization also falls into this kind of broad category where Russia tries to regulate international companies and ensure that it has more control over what they do. So I know that data regulation is becoming increasingly prominent in other countries. But again, more generally, it's this approach to ensuring that your sovereignty is also relevant in the digital space. I think this is the kind of general point. So there is a lot of discussion about digital sovereignty in Europe right now. The United States, you see, also they're talking more about kind of the sovereign approaches and how to protect. But they're in different situation because the United States hosts many of these companies. So about specific data localization kind of lessons, probably it's too early to say, and different countries have different approaches. So in Russia, for example, I think there is a strong focus on larger companies in this regard, and maybe the government does not have this kind of comprehensive capacity to require kind of every company from localizing their data. Because if you think about it, there are not only dozens of major companies, but there are hundreds of companies, and some of them would not kind of comply with it, or even if they kind of violate this norm, no one will focus on them because they are only kind of a drop on the sea. In terms of practical implementation, no one can use LinkedIn from Russia without a VPN or some kind of other tool, because it has been blocked for many years, precisely for the reason that LinkedIn decided not to comply with this proposal. But it's not it's not convenient for users of LinkedIn. But LinkedIn decided that it did not want to kind of to fight this war because it did not have too many users in Russia, that it wanted to kind of ensure they have perfect access. So here we are, I guess.
Right. Thank you for that. And I think that sort of digital sovereignty approach definitely that's gaining traction across, and definitely in India as well, as we look at newer regulations that are probably going to get tabled by the end of the session of the parliament that's running now. I think
But do you think, Sapni, that India's approach to data localization, do you think it was inspired by Russia or by someone else? Because I've heard about this, and my feeling was that it was kind of organic. It did not have to be inspired by Russia or other states.
Definitely, I don't think it's inspired by a particular state, but the general rising tendency, I think, across states for having data localization mandates, that did contribute to India's interests. And also India does see economic interests in doing data localization So I think that's also one reason why we are having a rising interest in having localization mandates. And I think I'll hop on to another question somewhat related to social media again. So France is given a green light to counter adversarial information operations through its new influence doctrine, which was out sometime last week. And while these discussions have happened, Russian info operations have also been a moot point. So how do you see such developments for broader norm setting, even in peaceful times and otherwise in the cyberspace?
So I think it's quite remarkable that France has put this out in the open for a couple of reasons. So unlike norms for cyberspace, something that I think we might talk about, and something that was being discussed at the United Nations for almost, or maybe for more than 2 decades now, there is no real discussion about these norms for influence operations or about information operations in terms of propaganda, etc. But it is something that has become increasingly prominent over past several years, and it usually was being talked about kind of in very quiet mode. But France now published its own doctrine. I think it will be interesting to see how big tech companies will react to this. We actually saw, I think it was last year, where Facebook blocked, or at least like reported, two parallel information operations that were conducted reportedly by French actors, or by French defense, by French military, and by some Russian actors in Africa. And so from the perspective of Facebook and other companies, there should be probably less of a difference whether it is something like a declared information operation or something else. So in a situation where you exploit their platform, there would be they might have incentives to still kind of restrict actors access to such actors. But I'm not. It's not clear what France is talking about. Is it because this can include many parts. This can include some kind of benign kind of white propaganda where you just increase the awareness and you just invest more in spreading some information, and all the way to this black propaganda where you hide your identity and you create some front organizations and pretend like you're someone else. And here we see this kind of paradox that on the one hand, the internet and in particular social media companies, they create kind of more room for these kinds of operations, but they also make them more traceable and more transparent, maybe not to the general public, but to these companies themselves. And they have now interesting leverage and control. So basically, a social media company like Facebook is now capable of stopping some kind of information war or information operation, which probably was more difficult when you did not have such a central power, central authority that could stop, for example, publication in all types of newspapers.
Right. I think and particularly it's of interest that you point out how the possibilities of having operations are so wide from being benign to actively having alternative fronts. And this is something, it's a development worth watching. And while we are again on the idea of social media, we'll briefly jump into the hype of metaverse here. So even as we record the day prior to the day we are recording this, there's a lot of hue and cry about the amount of money that's going into digital real estate and the whole idea about real estate on metaverse. So Barbados also has bought digital property on Decentraland, one of these metaverse spaces, and China seems to be subtly creating industry bodies within this realm. So could you please elucidate what the Russian position on this development regarding metaverse is?
Yeah, so I only caught up on what this whole idea was only recently. I think the buzz in Russia is not yet in this kind of maximum. Is not the maximum point. We have, of course, some buzz at the industry level, and people are very interested in what Facebook is doing, etc. But on the policy level, there is not enough kind of conversation. But we have this interesting observation made by President Vladimir Putin last month. He was attending a conference on artificial intelligence, and he said that he was speaking generally about protecting rights, about different challenges, and he said, so we should not only protect Russian citizens' rights in the digital space, but we need to also protect the rights of their kind of avatars in new metaverses. And he also said that the benefits of these metaverses should be explored and used. So this is the most kind of specific thing that has been said yet on the policy level. As far as my own opinion goes, I think there is definitely a lot of attention to this new kind of word, but this is not something entirely new. And I actually saw an interesting example. So Barbados said they were going to open the first embassy in the metaverse. And I recall that in 2007, more than a decade ago, the Maldives, they also announced that they were opening the first kind of virtual embassy in Second Life. This was and still is, I believe, a game which is sort of a metaverse, but before this new trend. So I don't yet see how this is going to be game changing, but it's definitely going to be big. And so on the policy level in Russia, and I think in many other countries, people are only now starting to get a grip of what is going on. And I think we might see more information coming up as this becomes a wider trend.
I think it's a very astute observation, given that's what even from our end we're also seeing, whether it be in India and even others in other countries, how they're sort of thinking about the policy actions around metaverse, and they've not even gotten to the point of metaverse. They're still looking at other building blocks which can enable metaverse from the policy side of it. They're still investigating what could be done and what has to be done. I think on that note, we'll take a short break, and on the other side, we'll talk more about interesting ideas on cyberspace and norms.
Your computer can be compromised in many ways, and all cyber attacks ultimately affect your files and apps by accessing everything that's on your PC. Intel vPro keeps you safe from cyber attacks using the Intel Hardware Shield, which has 3 groups of capabilities. First, advanced threat protection, quickly detecting issues like ransomware and crypto mining. Second, below the OS security, identifying unauthorized changes to hardware. And lastly, application and data protection, preventing malware injections. So, secure your organization's productivity with Intel vPro's hardware-based security. Visit intel.in/IT Heroes to know more. Remember, Intel vPro is built for business.
Welcome back, everyone. We are discussing cyberspace and international relations with Oleg Shakirov, and I have my colleague Aditya Parikh also here. So let's continue talking about this range of interesting developments we are discussing about cyberspace relations and norms. Russia has been an Indian ally for long, Oleg, and in this void that is globally accepted of the lack of cyberspace norms, where do you see that India and Russia can cooperate? And how contingent is this cooperation on US initiatives on cyber norms?
Okay, so thank you for this question. So I believe it's quite important. So first thing I would like to mention is that Russia has about a dozen bilateral agreements on information security, on like international information security on ICT and security. And India is one of these states. It was among the first states that Russia did this bilateral agreement with. It was, I think, 2016. So it's rather important for Russia, and it's an active process because we have bilateral consultations at the level of Security Council of Russia. And for example, the most recent round of consultations took place, I think, in September of this year. And there is also some practical cooperation. So I remember when there was this notorious cyber attack on the systems of Kudankulam nuclear power plant. We don't know exactly whether Russia was involved in helping out, but there were reports that India was tipped off by some foreign country, which could have probably been Russia. And also a Russian diplomat said that Russia and India were consulting on these issues. So I think this is definitely something related to practical cooperation. And actually, I looked up what Russian and Indian officials talked about this September. It's also quite remarkable that they have some specific aspects there. So they mentioned that they want to strengthen cooperation between national computer emergency response teams. They also mentioned about some agreeing approaches to attribution of cyber incidents, etc., etc. So there is some very concrete stuff. In terms of international, at the global level, in the United Nations, India, as far as I understand, co-sponsored the most recent resolution that was put to the vote at the first committee by Russia and the United States. And I think in general, from this like global perspective, India is seen as a close partner with Russia in these information related issues. As far as the United States are concerned, I haven't seen actually a lot of tension in this domain. Maybe there are other issues related to some kind of. So the United States definitely wants to have India more involved in its own approach to competing with China. So this might be more controversial, but in the information or cyberspace, I haven't seen many problems. I believe that we can even talk about or maybe speculate about India playing a role of some kind of I don't know, maybe a mediator or a bridge between Russia and the United States to some extent, not like primary goal. But for example, India was invited to this meeting that took place in October, the counter ransomware initiative, which was organized by the White House for about 30 plus states. So Russia was not invited, India was, and I think while I think that it would have been beneficial if Russia was invited, but I think India can share some non-secret insights from those meetings, and maybe let other participants know how Russia could contribute. So I don't see any major tensions in this space. I hope there could be more cooperation, because until now, Russian-Indian cooperation in this space has been very productive.
And I agree with you that that it would be really productive at a global scale that we have cooperations, and the lack of certain tension in the internet, in the cyberspace domain, certainly looks like a green flag to all of us who are looking at this space.
So Oleg, I have a few questions. So there were some draft resolutions in the UNGA's first committee recently about responsible state behavior in cyberspace norms. I think you and Kommersant's Elena Chernenko were the most visible sources on the matter. Could you tell us what this so-called compromise between the two opposing camps in the UN over cyberspace norms is all about?
Thanks. Yeah, it was an interesting development, and it was only briefly mentioned, for example, in the American media. Maybe it doesn't play as central of a role as we would like it to see. But so basically, we had a split of these cyber talks in late 2018, when Russia had its own initiative, the OEWG, and the United States had its own process that it proposed, that the GGE, and these discussions were split for 2.5 years basically. And I think it's a good story that both of these processes succeeded, but the competition could have ended left us in a worse place. So I think that after the success of these two negotiating processes, there was this bilateral summit between Russia and the United States, and some bilateral consultations were restored, and maybe they figured out that there is at this point no longer a need for these dual dialogues. because the GGE was formally ended. We have the new open-ended working group that will run for the next 5 years. And I think this was the source of this compromise. But so I think it's historic in one sense, because it's the first time that Russia and the United States co-sponsored a draft resolution on this particular topic, and maybe on many other topics as well. But the importance of this should not also be overstated, because of course this is a long-term process. Diplomacy negotiations, it happens very much in small iterations, and there would be much more time will have to pass before additional progress is achieved, while we have some more pressing issues that are happening now, and they will also need to be addressed with, but maybe not at the United Nations, but bilaterally or regionally or elsewhere.
Interesting. So the reconciliation between, rather the rapprochement between the US and Russia in the UN is really something to watch out for. It's really a space we'd like to watch. Moving on, so Oleg, in one of your recent publications for CFR, you argued that the US could have done more to involve Russia in the counter ransomware initiative. What kind of prospects do you see if the US were to be more warm towards Russia in this area?
Thank you for bringing it up. So when the United States announced this meeting in the beginning of October, my first thought was, is Russia going to be invited? And I thought that of course not, because Russia is considered kind of a bad actor often in Washington. So I was not really expecting that Russia was going to be invited. But my first title for this article was Russia should be invited, and I thought it would be published before this meeting took place. But they organized it pretty fast, and I changed the title, so it's now why Russia should have been invited. So I think first of all that the Biden administration had made an important and correct decision in spring, when there was a major ransomware attack that affected the Colonial Pipeline and in general the fuel supply on the East Coast in the United States. They made an important call. They said that the actor behind that attack was not involved with the Russian Federation, but that Russia was able to do more to fight these kind of threats. So it kind of separated criminal actors from the government, and I think it opened up a room for dialogue, or for basically a room for more cooperation on fighting shared threat of cybercrime. Because if the United States framed this differently as a kind of Russia problem, then it would be more difficult to address, because Russia would be seen as part of the problem, whereas they decided to frame cybercrime as a problem and Russia as part of the solution. And we've seen this develop bilaterally in the form of these bilateral consultations. But I would love to see this continued into multilateral space, so Russia could have helped or could have been involved in this multilateral setting as well. We haven't seen that, but I see several benefits of Russian participation. So one big problem related to ransomware and to cybercrime in general is that it exploits cryptocurrencies and other new ways of basically laundering money. And as many states you get into countering money laundering related to cybercrime, the better. So I think Russia definitely could have played a role here. And there were subsequent reports about some cryptocurrency exchanges located in Russia that were reportedly involved in cybercrime money laundering. And there were some unconfirmed reports about security services raids on these cryptocurrency exchanges. But even if that was not kind of accurate reporting, I see that Russian authorities take greater interest in this. So Russian Financial Intelligence Service develops this capability to trace cryptocurrency transactions, which I think can be used not only for some traditional crime, but can be used to trace proceeds from cybercrime. So this is just one example where I think Russian, US, or like Russian multilateral cooperation could have been useful, and that's why I think Russia should have been invited. But of course, we do not live in the perfect world, and I realized that given the existing political and other concerns, it was probably not the most realistic scenario.
Indeed, Oleg, I absolutely agree with you. The US really needs to do more and to bring Russia into the fold when it comes to countering ransomware. For my final question, so this is a sort of personal question. Very recently, I was reading a book on climate change titled Klimat by Thane Gustafsson, and he talks a bit about the fact that internet connectivity beyond Moscow and St. Petersburg was hardly a given only a few years ago. How do you see this, especially the Russian Far East, which lacks connectivity in terms of overland fiber optics and submarine cables along the NSR Arctic Russian landmass? What is your take on the Polar Express submarine cable project?
Thanks. I would like to give several comments. So first, I haven't read the book, but this general comment about internet connectivity beyond Moscow and St. Petersburg being non-existent or weak, I think it's not correct, but I don't know what exactly is meant by this. But even a decade ago, most like major Russian cities were well connected, and maybe in some rural areas or some remote areas, the access and connectivity were not on the same level as in Moscow and St. Petersburg, but in most populated areas, it was quite good a decade ago. So it was not the biggest problem. But of course, there are many challenges, and you can improve in many areas. And this is what I think that this Polar Express project will do. So for those who don't know, it's a major undertaking that will be completed by 2026, if I'm not wrong. So it's a trans-Arctic kind of cable project that will start in Murmansk. So Murmansk is northwest of Russia, and it will go to the east across the Arctic, across this northern route. Then it will go to Kamchatka, and then to Vladivostok, to Sakhalin, and then to Vladivostok. So it's major undertaking. And I read the news reports that this August they started this first stage that will be from Murmansk to another city in the Russian Arctic. But the way I understand it, it's not about primarily connecting Russia, central, like western part of Russia with the Far East. Its most immediate benefits will be for these Arctic regions themselves, because in some of them connectivity is actually quite low, but they're not the most populated areas. So in terms of the whole country, it's not as visible. But still, given Russia's plans for developing the Arctic, for looking for ways to develop this kind of commercial route, it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I think I'm very positive about this project. It's a big undertaking, and I would love to see it being completed.
That is something definitely that we have to look forward to and see how this shapes up. I think this has been a very interesting conversation, Oleg. Thank you so much. And I think we'll probably have episodes talking to you again, and that we definitely would look forward to that. And on that note, folks, we'll call it a wrap for this particular episode. But if you liked today's discussion, and do not fail to check out the past, and please do definitely listen to the future episodes of All Things Policy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Aditya. Thank you, Sapni. It was a nice conversation, and let's keep in touch.
Sure, Oleg.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, Check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus is joined by Prachi Gangwani, author of the new book Dear Men, Masculinity and Modern Love in Me Too India. They discuss some of the common experiences that women face in relationships, what problems men experience in today's heterosexual relationships, couple dynamics, and a whole lot more. On the Filter Coffee podcast, Karthik asks independent filmmaker and producer Radhika Lavu about the revolutionary changes in the regional content industry. Want to break out of the habit of people-pleasing? On Say No to Drama, Chetna talks about how to say no and stand your ground. All Things Policy discusses the barriers women face in creating and accessing social networks. And on Naan Curry, Sadaf and Archit explore India's favorite cheese, paneer, and its multiple origin stories. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Also, do remember, go check out our website, ivmpodcast.com/YouTube, to get a list of all of our YouTube channels. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors on the network this week: Cred, Bank of Baroda, HDFC Mutual Fund, CoinSwitch, Kuber, Intel, and Oxfam India. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Are you looking for finance products and services that can enhance your personal finance experience? Are you looking for a space to talk about your financial product or service? And are you looking for a crisp talk show where the conversation is all about money? Well, your search ends here. Hi. My name is Anupam Gupta and I'm host of the Paisa Paisa podcast, and I invite you for the conversation about your personal finance on each Monday on the IVM Podcast app or the website or on any podcast streaming platforms. See you folks.